airplanes. We have Nick here. Nick, welcome to the show, sir, and thank you for wanting to come on board.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity to come out and have a conversation with you.
Yeah, I really enjoy these, and as I'm starting out, I'm learning new things. I'm always excited to talk about all things aviation, most things military, and I mainly focus on the human side of the story. I not so much radars and weapons and stuff, but I am interested in some of the threats that are out there. But I want to talk about air refueling because I think that that's sometimes not fully understood. There's a global air refueling. There's a more tactical air refueling. There's a lot that goes into air refueling. It's just not like you guys hang out in the sky and wait for people to ask for gas, right? So anyway, let's talk about Nick. Nick, how old were you when you decided you wanted to be in three-dimensional flight?
Well, so there's kind of, I guess, two versions of that. One is the little kid version, and one's the slightly older little kid version.
Hmm.
So as a young kid, 2, 3 years old, I was enamored with trains and airplanes and bulldozers like every little kid is. But the family lore is, growing up, my mom taught night school, and my dad worked for a department store in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we lived at the time right underneath the base leg into the Oakland airport. And there was always kind of a nightly changing of the guard between my parents. And apparently, this is family lore. One night when my dad was handing off to, or mom was handing off to dad for the PM shift, an airplane flew over. My dad was saying, "All right, wave goodbye to mom," and I looked up and I said, "Airplane." And that was kind of when my family was like, "Uh oh, we might be hooked with something." And then
Hmm.
I was probably about 8 years old when I said, "You know what? I think this is kind of neat. I'm kind of enamored by this. Um, I'm interested in becoming a flyer, I think." And it just never went away. I read a book called The Last Mission by Harry Mazer. It's like a teenage novel, middle schooler novel. And it was about this young 16-year-old kid that ran away to join the 8th Air Force to go fly missions as a gunner on a B-17 and got shot down. And I read that book and went, man, I don't know how I do this, but this is what I want to do with my life. Not get shot down, obviously, but I just became enamored with World War II, with aviation,
Right.
and kind of
Uh-huh.
continued on from there.
Oh, that's awesome. And maybe history's in your blood somewhat too with that book,
Oh,
huh?
I very much think it is. Yeah, I
So
very much think it is.
so you didn't have like I said, I want to be a fighter pilot, I want to be a bomber pilot or whatever. You wanted to be a pilot.
No, I
Is
wanted to be a B-17 pilot. That's what I wanted to be. And
Oh,
there's a
cool.
part of me that still very much yearns for that opportunity.
Uh-huh.
And you can't ever make the 8-year-old kid go away. But yeah, I was very very pinpoint and very specific. All the
That
guys out there that are like, "Oh, the Mustang's the coolest airplane in the world." Yeah, it's a very cool airplane. But I tell you what, to me, there's nothing cooler than a 17.
you're very right. It's a good looking, no matter what version of the 17, it's a good looking aircraft.
Yes, it
So
is.
so now you're in high school. Now you got to kind of think in terms of where you're going to go from here. And
Yeah,
what was
so
that look like?
I uh I was probably about 12 or 13, and I had a cousin who was graduating from the Air Force Academy.
Oh,
And I didn't know much about it. I just knew that that was the path necessarily to take, or that was the best path to take in order to become a pilot in the Air Force.
mm-hmm.
So I have a very vivid memory of sitting down with him at probably 12, 13, and talking with him at length about, all right, how'd you do this? What did you do? What was your path? What did it look like? And that became my blueprint. And I followed that pretty much to the letter. So in high school, I did all the things that were going to make me a competitive applicant, probably to the detriment of my social development as a high schooler. But, I was in high school leadership. I was one of the captains on the football team, varsity captain of the wrestling team. I was
Wow.
in band, in choir. I did community volunteerism, and did all kinds of things. Whatever I could do to really round out my application, obviously, in addition to getting good grades, in order to become a qualified
Uh,
applicant. And despite all of my best efforts, I am a terrible test taker, And ultimately, that's what prevented me from getting my appointment the first time around. So graduating high school, I ended up going to Northwestern Preparatory School, which is a service academy prep school. So you've got the Air Force Academy Prep School, the Naval Academy Prep School, West Point's Prep School, that are really designed to bring enlisted members from the force and bring them up to an academic standard. Sometimes they'll bring in athletes or people that just need a little bit of academic polishing before they'll be competitive to get into the academy. But there are also a number of non-directly affiliated programs across the country that you can attend that do basically the same thing. And you have the option, and option is an operative word because you're really selected for it, of either being a sponsored member going through that program or unsponsored. If you're sponsored, the academy has said, "Hey, we want you to bring your SAT scores up, your standardized test scores up. So we will sponsor you to go to this prep school and pay for the training." Unsponsored, you paid for it out of pocket. It was one semester, and it was basically just a hyper-focused SAT prep course. And that's what we did Monday to Friday, was just practicing the tests like crazy. And again, because I'm not a very good test taker, after finishing the program and going through some additional stuff, I had to take the SATs 13 times and the ACT 5 times before I finally got competitive enough scores to get an appointment. So I was able to get an appointment to the Air Force Academy, got accepted at the Air Force Academy. So I was like, "Hey, this is awesome. Everything's looking great. I'm really excited about it." Finished up my time at Northwestern Prep School. And unfortunately, I had a medical condition, very minor, but it required a waiver in order to get into the academy. And that waiver required a second doctor's sign off. And in moving the packet of paperwork from one doctor's desk to another doctor's desk, they lost it, which meant that I went from being a fully qualified, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to start applicant, to too bad, so sad, you're not coming here this summer. And I basically freaked out, understandably, and started knocking on every Air Force ROTC program's door in California, where I'm from, just up and down the state. "Hey, it's June. Is there anyone that will let me in to start in the fall semester and do ROTC?" And eventually I was able to get San Jose State to let me do a late admission. Did a year at San Jose State. And while I was there doing Air Force ROTC, I had a mentor who was a West Point graduate. And he said, "Hey, man, I think you're a better fit for West Point than for the Air Force Academy. Just humor me and apply. I know you don't really want to do the Army, that you really want to do the Air Force, but humor me and just apply to West Point." And that particular year, I got the primary nomination to West Point from Senator Feinstein's office. And I got the alternate nomination to the Air Force Academy from my congressman's office. So I was stuck with a choice of, do I hold out and take the alternate on the hopes that the kid who got the primary doesn't want to go, or do I accept the primary to West Point? And at the end of the day, the guy who decided he wanted to take the primary slot ended up going to the Air Force Academy, and I was kind of left with a choice of, if I'm going to do this, if I've said I want to be a service academy guy, if I'm going to do this, I kind of got to do it. So made the decision, and it was a very challenging decision. I remember the conversation in my parents' kitchen very well. And I said, "All right, I guess I'm going to the Army." And I started prepping to start at West Point for the following summer.
What year would this be?
This was in 2000, and this was the summer of 2005.
Okay.
Wow, yeah, summer 2005.
What a handful of stress, decision making, footwork, engagements, follow-ups. That wow. For somebody that doesn't test well, you certainly passed the test of perseverance.
That's about the biggest thing I got going for me, is I don't give up very easy.
That's funny, Nick. And I want our audience to know, as we go through the Flying Dutchman podcast, you're going to see some examples of what Nick just provided, or some individuals that had to go different routes to attain their goals. and the one thing that really stands out is prep, motivation, desire, and prep. But now you're in West Point. The desire to wear blue has been traded for OD green and gray. And did you have any prejudices against Army because you were more pro Air Force, or did that all just shed away and you were just so
No,
you don't have time to think like that probably once you hit that door?
the exact opposite. That was all I thought about. Because
Oh,
when I got to West Point, it's 2005, so it's kind of the height of the post invasion of Afghanistan, post invasion of Iraq. Right, the invasions were
mm,
done, but we're just in the midst of all of the most kind of hectic initial stages of combat in both
uh,
Afghanistan and Iraq. And
yes,
everything, especially that first summer, was about leadership. And your decisions are going to end up getting soldiers killed. And, you just got your whole platoon killed because you didn't shine your boots, the right way. And I'm sitting there going, guys, I just want to be in an airplane, man. Just forget this running around out in the woods. How do I get upstairs? That's all I was concerned about. So it was a real struggle for me. And I actually, I tried resigning from the academy about 5 times over the course of my first 2 years.
they weren't
And
hearing it,
every
were they?
time, it wasn't as much the academy as it was kind of myself and all of my mentors and everyone else that was like, listen, man, just make it through the next milestone. Just make it through the next gate. I actually applied to and got a scholarship to do Air Force ROTC at Embry-Riddle in my sophomore year at the academy because I was like, this is not the right fit. There's no focus on flying. Everything's about leading the infantry out in the woods, and
Mm-hmm.
this is not where I want to be or what I want to be doing. Which made it the academy is in and of itself an incredibly grueling, challenging, frustrating, taxing environment to be in, and adding that additional element to myself and unfortunately to my family. My parents were like, listen, man, we can't keep taking these black phone calls about the world ending. You got to make up your mind and figure out what you want to do. And I'm
That's
very
good
blessed with
parenting.
yeah, I'm blessed with my parents for understanding me for that. But yeah, it was a challenge. But ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
I ended up finding some outlets that kind of gave me the pathway forward. One was a lot of really good mentors, officers that really invested in um, whatever potential they saw in me.
Uh-huh.
Said, hey, man, you really need to stick it out. I was also fortunate enough, I'd started flying in high school. My parents bought me an introductory flight in a Boeing Stearman that kind of
Wow.
solidified and just told me, hey, man, you're hooked. I have a very vivid memory of that first flight taking off out of the Livermore Airport in Northern California and
Mm.
getting high enough to just see over the foothills there and seeing the Bay Area blanketed in fog and the Wells Fargo building, the top of the building was sticking out of the clouds
Mm-hmm.
and it glinted. And I had this moment where I went, all right, this is what I'm supposed to do. God just winked at me. So I'm pretty sure that I'm supposed to spend my life in the sky. But at the academy, I was a history major, and I was asked to step up as the cadet in charge of the flying club. And so, being a history major, I figured, oh, the club's probably been around since the 50s. There's got to be some stuff in the old archives. Let me go look up there and see if I can find an article or two, and then I can write a little, synopsis of the club and what we've done and what we need to do to get the club back really going organizationally wise. And went up there and found out about the Air Cadet program, which existed at the Academy from 1938 until 1948, where you would basically track, I'm going to be a ground officer or an air officer. And if you were selected as an air officer, you went through your primary and basic and advanced training while you were simultaneously going through the academy with all of its rigors, with the goal being that you graduated with your wings and your commission on the same day and proceeded out to whatever advanced airframe that you were going to be in. And being the history nerd that I am, I saw that story and just went, man, this reading all the West Point histories that we had to read over the course of our time there, I was like, I'm not seeing this anywhere. And it really just became something that gave me an outlet to kind of channel some of that angst associated with not being part of a flying organization.
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately, over the course of my time there, when I took over as the club president, the club hadn't flown an airplane in about 5 years.
Well, that
Um,
kind of takes me back that West Point had a flying club. And if they had a flying club, I would think rotor wing, not fixed wing.
You would think, but it was a fixed wing club that had been around. The club was founded in the late post-war years, so
Mm-hmm.
47, 48. And it was meant as a way, as an outlet for officers, for cadets to just go out and kind of blow off some steam. And it kind of stayed that way. So my freshman year and part of my sophomore year, it was really just going and taking a tour of New York TRACON, which was a really cool opportunity to go do. TRACON is the Terminal Area Control Radar. So it's basically, who runs the centers that all the airline pilots and military pilots are talking to. And then we went to a couple air museums and some different events, but we didn't fly. And then my junior year, myself and primarily an officer, I just kind of did some of the busy work that she didn't want to do. We got the club flying again for the first time in 5 years. And I used that as
Wow.
my outlet to be able to get my private pilot's license while I was still at West Point.
Good
So
job.
while
Good
everyone
job.
was off, running around on the weekends, I would load up in the van and drive to the Stewart Airport, which was the old Stewart Army Airfield, which is where the flying cadets were actually learning to fly.
I bet
And I
C5s
would
were based there, weren't they?
C5s were based there for a
Yeah.
while, yes.
Yeah.
So between there and the Poughkeepsie Airport, we would bounce up and go take flying lessons. And I think one of my proudest accomplishments as a cadet was in my last year. We petitioned the academy to switch it from a flying club to a flying team, and we were able to do that. And I wasn't able to participate as a team member because it didn't get activated until I think 2 years after I graduated.
Mm-hmm.
But West Point has won multiple regional championships. It's won a national championship twice for the
Very good.
collegiate flying team programs, and it's something that's very cool to say that I was a part of, kind of helping stand that organization back up and making it into what it is today.
And like a steering committee, you were on there for that.
Yeah,
That's
for a little bit. Yeah,
that's pretty cool. I was totally
yeah, it was
unaware.
fun.
I love learning stuff, and that's awesome. So we're going to advance the clock. You've graduated, and now it's time to go be a flyer for the Army, right?
Yeah,
How,
so
how
I
do you
was
how do
I
you
was
know what you're going to fly?
so I was very lucky. The year before I graduated, the Army had said, "Hey, we are really short on aviators, so we need 120 pilots," which out of a class of about 850 to 900, it fluctuates every year, but roughly that size, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty good percentage of the class. So I'm thinking I got a pretty good shot. I'm kind of middle of the road. I'm not the best student. I'm not the best militarily, but maybe I got a shot at making this happen. And my year, we only had 85 slots. So they cut it by 35 positions. And I went, oh, I may not be able to be a flyer. So I actually ended up being the last guy in my class to get aviation as an aviation officer, which of course meant that I went through the roof when I found that out. It was probably one of the most exciting nights of my life. But yeah, after graduation, I headed off to it's now Fort Novosel. Then it was Fort Rucker, and you just jumped into the training pipeline. You had no idea what you were going to fly. It was all based on performance. So how you performed over the course of training really dictated whether or not you were going to be able to get the airframe of your choice.
And with the Marine Corps rotor is if you're flying with wheels, you're hauling. If you're flying with skids, you're gunning. The
So the
Army, how did they think of it?
at the time, there was only one aircraft left in the inventory that still had skids, and that was the OH-58, which was the Kiowa Warrior, was a Scout, and everything else had wheels. So the Apache was a primary gun platform. The
Mm.
Chinook is a medium lift platform, and then the Blackhawk is kind of the jack of all trades that's able to do everything. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't finish in the top of my class, but I was top third. Um, so I actually had a choice of what I would be able to do. Um, and I was kind of stuck between, well, if I do Apaches, I get to go shoot the gun and do all the, typical, you know, military aviator stuff.
Yeah.
But there was talk, this is about the 2010, 2011 timeframe. And of course, it didn't happen for another 10 years. But at the time, there was talk about the war in Iraq and Afghanistan winding down and us really going from being part of an army at war to an army at peace. And I thought, man, flying the Apache sounds awesome, but I don't want to just take off, go get rockets, go to the range, come back, offload whatever rockets we didn't shoot, and then go home. I want to go do stuff with the platform. And I just love the versatility of the Blackhawks. So I ended up
It's a great
selecting
platform.
Blackhawks and flew that for about 9.5 years with the Army.
Wow, 9.5 years in the Blackhawk. So you
Yeah.
do you I'm not well versed, but you had to have flown more than one version of the Blackhawk, or were you strictly UH-60 A's or B's or C's or D or whatever it is
Yeah.
now?
So at the time, the Army had a mix of UH-60 alphas,
Mm-hmm.
UH-60 Limas, and then what we call the UH-60 alpha pluses, which were basically alpha models that had certain components of the Lima thrown onto them.
Mm-hmm.
And it really depended on the unit that you ended up being a part of. So my first unit was an air assault company out of Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia, which was a great assignment. Learned a ton flying with those guys.
Uh,
But that unit was only equipped with Limas, so I only flew Limas for the period of
okay.
time I was there. And it wasn't until a later assignment that I ended up flying Limas and Alpha Pluses for a little while.
Wow. And and we're going to move the clock some now because you had an obligation to the United States Army to be a part of the Army for X number of years. And I know you as a KC-135 pilot. When did the No More Army and now Air Force? How or
Yeah,
when did
so
that happen?
yeah, that was about the 2018 timeframe. Well, it started about 2016. So I deployed to Afghanistan with the Army. Got to do just shy of a year in Afghanistan, which is probably one of the defining periods of my life. It was really a very formative experience flying out there and serving out there. Lost, unfortunately, some really great soldiers on that deployment. Um, did that. It was spent time doing command down in Honduras, which was an incredible assignment. I got to fly medevac down there, loved it. But kind of the natural progression of a commissioned officer, which is what I was coming out of West Point in Army aviation, was eventually you were going to have to finish command and post command head to a staff or what they called a broadening assignment.
Would that be a
And
desk assignment?
yeah, it's a desk assignment. Or if it's not a desk assignment, it's not a flying assignment. So I was given a couple different options. I could go out to Fort Irwin, which is the National Training Center,
Mm-hmm.
and be an observer controller, which is basically when other units are doing war games, you're the referee. So it's not necessarily a desk job, but you're not actually flying the aircraft. You're just riding around in the back and kind of throwing flags on people as they're making fouls on plays, which didn't sound like the best job to me.
And it's
But because of
Barstow.
my, yeah, and it's Barstow. But because of my passion for history, I was trying to go back to West Point to teach in the history department.
Oh,
And I was made the alternate list 3 years in a row. So I never quite cut over the cusp to actually go back to the academy. But the guy that was working our assignments desk was a gentleman who I worked with in Honduras, and he goes, "Hey man, I can't get you back to West Point because you didn't get accepted, but if you're interested, I can get you to Southern California teaching ROTC, and you can be a military history instructor for a program down there." And I was like, "Yeah, it sounds like a great gig. California's where I'm from. It'll be
mm-hmm.
a great assignment." So I took an assignment in 2016, probably one of my favorite assignments in the Army, which was coach teaching and mentoring young officers or young cadets into
Mm-hmm.
becoming officers and teaching military history. Um, but as a result of that job, I kind of said, "Hey, big Army, when's the next chance I can go back to flying a machine?" And they went, "You're kind of done, bub. You're going to end up just because you where you're at in your career and what our timeline looks like. You'll most likely end up bouncing from assignment to assignment without getting qualified in the platform of the unit. So you may be assigned to flying units, but you probably won't be flying."
Oh,
And
that
I
seems so
thought
wrong.
that's yeah. It's the pyramid hierarchy of the Army, and it is that way for a reason. It's just when your passion and your professional motivation for service is driven by flying, um, that it really feels like someone's just putting a lid on your career, even though that's not necessarily the case.
I've heard this
Um,
before.
yeah. So I said, all right, well, I'm going to start looking elsewhere. And because of my experience trying to go to the Air Force Academy, I thought I can't look myself in the mirror as a 85-year-old man. Hopefully, I make it that long, but I can't look myself in the mirror and say that I didn't at least give it a shot. So I started applying to different squadrons across the Air Force Reserve and Air National Guard. In total, I applied to and rushed 35 different organizations. I was hired at every rotary wing organization I rushed, interviewed, and applied at, which was all of them, including one Army National Guard unit. But only one fixed wing unit was willing to take a chance on me, and that's my current unit now. Because at the time I was going to have to go back, despite being a homegrown instructor pilot with the Army and a civilian fixed wing multi-engine instrument commercial pilot, actually with an airline transport pilot rating at the time. The Air Force said, "You're not a real pilot because you've only flown helicopters, so we're going to send you right back to pilot training." And I'm very grateful to my current squadron because they were willing to take a chance on a disgruntled Army helicopter Bubba
Yeah.
and do all the paperwork to get me to go to training. So 2018, I made the jump officially from the active Army into the Air Force Reserve to start that pipeline.
Well, kudos to that squadron for doing
Well,
that.
I
You
think they may regret it sometimes, just with all the pain in the butt I've been to them. But
well,
I'm
as we
very
all
grateful
do,
to them.
right? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And
I'm
so,
very grateful to them. That's for sure.
um, by chance, did was Moffett flies the Air Force Jolly Green
Yep.
Blackhawk
So
platform?
I was hired at Moffett to fly for them, and being from the Bay Area, I was like, oh, it's a perfect fit. This makes a lot of
Right.
sense. I can come back home.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, the desire was to fly fixed wing, um,
Okay.
and that's just kind of the way that the cards played out. Was I kind of took a gamble on the fixed wing unit to go the 135 route, and gave up the opportunity to fly the Air Force's Pavehawk.
And just for anybody that's not familiar, is I have a display model here of a KC-135. This jet has been flying since 1955. They now have efficient engines, commercial CF56 motors on them,
CFM 56s, yeah.
and very fuel efficient. And so anyway, just put that out. So now you're going to undergraduate pilot training at this point,
Correct, yeah.
and you
Uh,
went to, where'd they send you for that?
so they sent me to Columbus Air Force Base, which, if you talk to Air Force pilots, that's the best option out of all the training bases because it's near Mississippi State and there's lots of stuff to do, and it's not that far of a drive to Atlanta and Memphis, and
Oh,
guys really like it. For me, I was like, hey, I got a year of flying airplanes. This is going to be kind of a fun opportunity, and it
mm-hmm.
really was. It was very. I was very impressed by the caliber and quality of the applicant that the Air Force.
You went through the T6 in your
Mhm.
training, then you went to the T38, or did you go to the Jayhawk?
I went to the T1 because
The
I was
T.
a tanker guy. So that at the
Okay.
time, the track was if you were going to go the tanker transport route, you went to the T1, which was a very fun airplane to fly.
It looks fun.
Uh, Yeah, and then I, did all the normal stuff that you do through the pilot training pipeline, and then ended up at Altus, Oklahoma, to go through the initial qual on the KC-135.
And the you're now qualified on the 135. You're now report to your unit. The air refueling mission is an interesting mission to me, and nobody kicks ass without tanker gas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a complicated process from where I look at it. Is that the headquarters is in Scott, and I'm probably wrong, but Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, and it's the global piece of it. You're in a reserve unit flying the 135, and you guys, do you know like a week in advance of your missions, or maybe they know who sets those missions, but when do you know you're going to have a mission, or does that flow? Does that a moving target?
It's kind of a moving target. The missions are all kind of pre-programmed, and quite frankly, I've never worked in that that particular desk that's responsible for that coordination. So I
Uh-huh.
don't know all the like ins and outs and idiosyncrasies associated with that planning process. But usually, I mean, it's like my experience in the Army was. You'll know what the flying schedule is 2, 3, 4 weeks out in
Oh.
terms of what you're going to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
But things will flex and change, and crew will jump on and jump off, and there's just a lot of change that happens with aviation. So the generic mission framework, you'll know that you're going to fly a line on Tuesday afternoon, right? Um, but sometimes the receiver will change day of. Sometimes it will change, a week prior. There's just a lot of times you show up before you go fly, and you're just, all right, what are we doing? What are we doing today? And you'll take that initial assessment during your initial brief to kind of get a feel for what the mission is going to be.
Does every flight include passing gas, or are there times that you're just there to get some hours in and go practice some ILSs somewhere? Or do you guys just kind of, hey, let's shoot up to Sacramento to Mather? They've got a nice runway. And then we'll shoot out over Lake Tahoe, and then we'll bring ourselves off the coast and work. I mean, can you plan it like that? Or is there?
Yeah, absolutely. So usually, because tanking is such a choreographed mission, right? You need
Mm-hmm.
a tanker, you need a receiver, you need an associated place to go meet up to give gas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so because that is coordinated so closely to make all those different pieces line up, you usually don't have a lot of flexibility in like, oh, you know what, today I want to go to Mather, or I want to go to, let's go to Yuma, or let's go do something someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
Usually you've kind of got a pre-programmed. What will
Okay.
change is if your receiver drops out for whatever reason, right? Um, I'll use Travis as a perfect example because the C5 maintenance record is notorious for them always breaking. So
Yeah.
it is not uncommon if you see a C5 on the schedule, you're like, all right, C5's there for now, but we'll see because by the time we go to get up there, they've probably broken and aren't
Place
going to
your
be.
bets.
Yeah, right. So we're not going to be refueling them on the way home, which then gives you a little bit of more latitude to try and figure out what you can do and where you want to go. But you are um, because of how choreographed it all is, it's less free flowing than just saying I want to go here today.
Okay. Okay. The like for instance, there's been different things looked at as far as air refueling missions, because you carry a boom on the end of the tanker. If you're doing Navy jets, then you have to be hooked up with a drogue system where it's a basket and the probe comes out of the Navy jet and they plug in. They refer to it as an Iron Maiden.
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys ever come back with the refueling probe from a Navy jet
Oh,
that
several
broke up?
times.
Several
Yes,
times.
several times. And to the Navy pilot's defense, there have only been a couple of times where I've flown with some F-18 guys, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know how good this guy or gal is.
Uh,
Um, Really, when it seems to be happening the most is in some of the more advanced airframes, the F-35 in particular,
you hit on something.
because because um, there is a different algorithm that is used for air refueling than in normal flight. So the pilot's inputs are modulated differently via the computer out to the flight controls. So it's meant to be more sensitive, right? But if the pilot needs a big input, they basically have to double or triple that input in order to get the jet where they need it, which then creates these oscillations and makes it a little bit more challenging for the pilot,
Uh,
which is where we end up seeing that kind of stuff happen. But it's by no means their intent to go out and do that. That's for
no,
sure.
somewhere, or which is a
There's
segue
been
to
Yeah, there's been discussion about that kind of stuff, but it's all still very theoretical.
okay. And one of the things to enhance the tanker's capability that the 60th uh, airlift out of Travis is they took a KC-10 with no fuel and plugged into a C5 and reversed fueled. And they actually drew fuel at like 135,000 pounds of fuel from the C5 into the KC-10. And then the KC-10 was able to go move on and do a refueling mission. And what they were simulating was the KC-10 with, that little pig's got long legs. I love that jet. Is They topped off who they topped off and simulated, hey, we got a flight of F-16s and they need fuel. They're not on the schedule, but they've been having to be retasked. They need fuel. Give them the fuel, and then a C-5 available comes up and refills the KC-10, and the KC-10 is able to continue on with more refueling missions. Um, I think that's such a fantastic concept. Uh, is a 135 able to reverse fuel flow?
So this is some of the stuff that I find absolutely hysterical about the Air Force and how short-sighted their memory is.
Uh-huh.
Yes, the tanker can absolutely reverse refuel. It's in our manuals. It's discussed in the manuals. Nobody does it. But the Air Force is now trying to find creative solutions. But it's been in the manual for 70 or 65 years about the capability existing. We just don't do it because there's really not a need for it, or there hasn't been a need for it. So now we're trying to employ these things that are new and unique as ways to kind of do more with less and extend capability. But I think it's hysterical because the KC-46 is a perfect example. The 46, there was a big article about how they kept the tanker aloft for 24 hours to determine feasibility of tanker longevity on these long duration sorties. And it's like, guys, we were keeping 135s in the air 24/7 in support of Operation Chrome Dome in the late 50s. Keeping a tanker airborne for 24 hours is not new news, but because it's a new jet and it's because it's something we haven't done in the past 20 years with our focus being on low intensity conflict. We've just kind of forgotten what so much of that capability and what the airframe is capable of. We've forgotten it and kind of left it in the wayside, and everything old is new again. And we're going, wow, look at all this. Look at what we can do. It just kind of makes me as a historian chuckle and go, yeah, this is not new, fellas. We've been doing this for a while.
That's interesting. Well, that's you know what? I'm glad to hear it, because anything that can enhance our capabilities, and especially if we're going to be looking at the Pacific Theater of Operations, that's a lot of water you got to fly over. And yeah, the with you're in the 135, but you also have a private pilot's license that you got, and you own your own airplane. I want to talk somewhat of that. You own a North American Navion.
Yeah. So my aircraft's actually a Ryan, but it's built with North American parts.
Oh,
So it was built. Actually, it was designed. The design team started on it in late war, in World War II, because the primary liaison aircraft of World War II was the L4 Grasshopper, right? The L5 Stinson. These were great platforms, but they were two-place airplanes that really you couldn't move. You couldn't move brass around the battlefield in a way that would allow. It just wouldn't allow the flexibility of being able to move a colonel and two of his brigade or battalion commanders to a location to assess what was going on. You didn't have that capability with a two-place airplane, so the need was established late in the war in World War II, and North American assigned the same production design team that had developed the Mustang and said, hey, crank us out a design for a four-place airplane. It's rugged enough to go in and out of these little tiny fields. And sure enough, they came up with an Avion. So it's built. The tail section is slightly scaled down, but it's a carbon copy of the tail on a Mustang. So if you look at the empennage of a Mustang and the empennage of an Avion, they're exactly the same design concept. Built with way overbuilt the gear, way overbuilt the airframe. It's built like a tank because it was intended to serve that purpose. And then the war ended, and North American went, well, what are we going to do with this four-place airplane that we don't have a government contract to fill? And they said, well, we'll sell it to all these airmen that are coming back from the war that are going to want to fly their families, and we'll have this new big boom. Instead of car sales, it'll be airplane sales, and everybody will be buying airplanes to fly all over the country. And North American started marketing it in 46. They had a pretty intense marketing campaign, but in I believe it was 47, Bonanza came out with a V-tail, and the V-tail's cost was $500 less than an Avion, and it went 10 miles an hour faster. So if you were looking at buying an airplane, it was more cost effective to get a Bonanza than it was an Avion, which is why the Bonanza kind of took off and became a very prominent airplane. And by towards the end of 47, end of 47, North American went, we're just not making enough money at this. It's not really our niche market. Let's offload it. So they ended up selling the whole production line. It was based out of the production facility was based out of what is now the LAX airport, the old Mines Field. The old factory for the Navion is still standing on LAX, and I love going and standing by it every now and again whenever I go out there and snapping a picture because I just think it's really cool.
Yeah,
But
that's
they
cool.
trucked the whole production facility, all the parts, everything down to Lindbergh Field in San Diego, where Ryan began production in early 48. So my airplane is one of those airplanes that is produced by Ryan, but if you actually climb around the inside, all the parts are stamped North American,
Wow,
um,
that's
which is
cool.
kind of neat.
That's very neat.
Uh, and they built the airplane when Korea kicked actually in about 48. The Army said, "Hey, we're interested in buying some of these. We'll use it in the National Guard. We'll put a couple on active duty to fill that same role." So it filled that role. And then in Korea, it was flying with different Army divisions and the Air Force. And I went, "Hey, this airplane is actually pretty well suited to this role." So it had a pretty prominent history flying in Korea. It was primarily just a liaison airplane, but probably the greatest claim to fame of the Navion. There's a lot of lore and mystique about, I've heard some crazy ones about they'd load a 55-gallon drum full of explosives. They'd take the Navion's canopy off and they'd roll it inverted and then it'd drop out like a bomb. It's all
Uh,
patently untrue.
oh darn! I
Um,
wanted them on my show.
yeah, but the truth, I mean, what the Navion did do that is very true was the Navion performed the first forward designated forward air controller mission, where its sole purpose was to guide other aircraft onto a target on the ground, and that was because the Navion had the appropriate radios installed to talk with both ground forces and other aircraft. So
Mm-hmm.
it kind of filled that role very perfectly. But very quickly they realized there's no hard points on a Navion, so you can't mount rockets or bombs or guns or anything else. Um, and the role was switched to the Texan. So the T6, there were several called them mosquito squadrons, but they loaded them up with um, white phosphorus marking rockets and other
Mm-hmm.
smoke rockets and other implements
Mm-hmm.
to mark targets. And the forward air controlling mission kind of grew from there and was really used throughout Vietnam. But the Navion was the genesis of all of that, which I think is a great lineage, great history.
I'd say it is. And when was the last Navion rolled off the production line? Do you know?
So the last production B model that was built as a canopy model Navion rolled off the
Yeah.
assembly line in 53. And then it was sold, it was 53 or 54.
Mm-hmm.
Might have been early 54. Either way, it rolled off the last one rolled off the production line, and then it kind of floated around for a little bit. And then in the 60s, it was modified, and they removed the canopy and put a kind of a Bonanza style or Mooney style door on it, made some other changes to it. And there's several of those that are still out flying around. Um, but I became enamored with it when I was at Fort Rucker as a flight school student because they had one on a pedestal out in front of the museum, and I went, man, I don't know what that is, but that is a cool looking airplane. And the more I read the history of it and saw kind of what it was and what niche the airframe was really capable of, IFR, long cross countries, dirt fields, it just went, man, this is like the perfect, buy it now, grow with the family and be able to take the family on long camping trips and that kind of stuff at some point in the future. And I really just became enamored with it, and I've had mine for 12 years now.
Nice. What year was yours built?
Mine was May of 48.
And for people out there that probably don't follow aviation or so whatever, but the reason why you can have such an old aircraft like that still flying is that the upkeep and the airframe and power plant inspections and maintenance and I forget when something comes out in publication that if you own this aircraft, this needs to be inspected this often, this many hours and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. So it's really monitored, these aircraft are, and their upkeep. And you're the owner, you're the pilot, so it's your butt on the line if things aren't done right. So you definitely keep an eye on those things. But what paint scheme, what colors is your aircraft?
So when I bought mine had no military history to it whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
But mine was purchased. It's kind of got an interesting history. It rolled off the assembly line in '48, and then it went down to Mexico and served oil pipeline purposes for a an oil company in Mexico until the early '60s. And then it was imported back into the States and sold, came in Arizona, was sold to a couple of people, ended up in Texas. And a gentleman in Texas owned it for, he's the longest owner of the airframe. And his name is Bob Allen. And Bob Allen was the last, he was a B-25 pilot in the CBI, China Burma India Theater in World War II. And he flew the last production B model, or excuse me, last production G model, B-25, the one with the cannon in the nose.
Oh,
And
wow.
he, his airplane was called Bones. So the airplane, my airplane is painted orange and white, which kind of is it was what I was painted when I bought it. It's kind of an 80s paint scheme.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of a throwback to the orange and white of the old Army helicopters I learned to train in.
Oh
And when
yeah.
it came time to finish, we ended up doing a fairly extensive restoration on the airplane, just because, again, part of the upkeep of old airplanes.
Yeah.
Um, when it came time to kind of like unveil it and get it back flying again, I named the airplane Bones 2 in honor
Nice.
of Bob. And it's got his squadron mascot on the nose.
That's cool, Nick.
And I found out over the course of my ownership that West Point, the flying club, and let's tie the circle here, West Point's flying club back in the '50s actually had two Navions.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
so I've got a West Point crest up on the tail flash, and it says, West Point Flying Club up on the nose, and just some other little nods to Bob's history, to my history, and to the
Yeah.
airplane's history.
Yeah, Nick, that's totally cool.
Yeah, it's kind of neat. It's
Yeah,
kind of
if you,
neat.
if you could float a picture my way, I wouldn't mind putting it on the show here and displaying it
Yeah,
as we talked about
yeah,
it.
absolutely,
Yeah, and that way
absolutely.
people don't have to look at me as long. But we're about we're about on the hour mark here. I wanted to play a game on my show called Three Word Association, and I'm going to give you three airframes and just say the first thing that comes to your mind. If we feel you said something that might hurt feelings, we can always edit it, but you'll have to give me a business case to make that edit. So, so I'm gonna since you're a tanker driver, we're gonna give you three airframes here, and I'm gonna start with first thing that comes to your mind, Nick. KC-10,
Terrifying.
terrifying. Okay, KC-46.
Before we get to the
We could
next one, I'd like
expand
to,
on it. You're more
yeah,
than welcome to
I'd love to
expand.
expand on it.
Please.
So the 10 is a big, massive airframe,
Mm-hmm.
and we do a mission on a standard track that's kind of we jokingly say, they had all the hats in Vietnam. It was like 100 hours over the Hanoi or the Ho Chi Minh Trail, right? Um, or 100 missions over the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Mm-hmm.
We've got hats that say 100 mission over the refueling track that we do, because it's kind of a joke. We just do this track all the time, and it's primarily supporting the KC-10 schoolhouse out of Travis. And the KC-10 is a very big airplane with
Oh yeah,
a big wake.
it
And
pushes air,
when
don't it?
it does, big time. And when new students are learning how to get qualified doing air refueling because they can receive, they have a tendency to overcorrect, which has a tendency to kick our autopilot off and cause some very tense moments in the airplane. Not their intent. They're not trying to do it, but it's just a function of how difficult it is to get that airplane where it needs to be. And yeah, I'd say that probably the most scared I've been in the tanker has been with a KC-10 on the
That
boom. We're
that
trying to
that
get on the boom.
are these dry hookups?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's terrifying. That's accepted. Circle takes a square. KC-46.
New, shiny, and broke.
A330.
New, shiny, and works.
It pains me to admit that because I'm that if it ain't Boeing, I ain't going. But the A330 is turning out to be quite the It's
You
a
know,
multi-role tanker transport, and it's living up to that.
I think so two things on that, right? I'm not a 46 guy, so it's all in good fun and it's all ribbing, but
And it should
I
be.
do think that I think that the airframe's got some merit to
Mm-hmm.
it. But the Air Force got exactly what it asked for. And what it asked for was a multi-capable tanker. And
Mm-hmm.
just like we know, whenever we start taking multiple capabilities and start throwing them as add-ons to what the primary mission should be,
Mm-hmm.
you always end up compromising in different realms and regimes. So, they wanted a KC-10 where you could do cargo and gas, but they also wanted some advanced battle tracking, battle management capability that is similar to like an AWACS. It does all of that, but it does none of it well.
Yeah. I mean, and the Italians fly the KC-46. Japan flies them without those add-ons, and
Mm-hmm.
they're happy with them. Um, have you
A
heard
good
that?
good friend of mine, his father is he was one of the Boeing acceptance pilots,
Uh-huh.
and we were out having a beer one night and just kind of chatting, and he said, the Air Force got exactly what it asked for, so they really can't be upset that the 46 isn't delivering. They got exactly what it was that they put on their specification sheet. And
Yeah.
granted, I haven't read it. I don't know what that looks like. I'm just a lowly, nobody line pilot, but you kind of get that sense that yeah, it's too much and none of it well.
Right. Probably the same Air Force that thinks an F-35 can replace an A-10.
Yeah.
Um, I've also read where they entertained the thought of only having a pilot in the 46 and not a co-pilot. Single. I don't know if that ever gained any traction. I sure hope not. But um, well, Nick, in the interest of time, and I just want to appreciate you willing to come on my show. I enjoy the talk. I like the frankness, and very well rounded. Rotor head, heavy buddy. And people got to remember too when the KC-135 is refueling, that 135 is getting lighter, and the receiver aircraft is getting heavier. So that's probably changing some trimming on your guys' part, or I don't know if the autopilot can handle all that at once. I don't know, but it's a
Yeah,
dynamic going on up there.
yeah, it is, and kind of one of the fun things about the airplane. Um,
It's good
so
looking. It's a good looking plane.
it is. We got a big yoke in the airplane, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you're flying it with a yoke, and then you got your hand on the throttles to make any adjustments, or if anything goes wrong to initiate a breakaway. But they teach in training for the new guys that if you take a pen or a pencil and you taped it to the bottom of the yoke, that pen or pencil is going to point to wherever the receiver's at. So if the receiver's right in the middle, the yoke's going to sit nice and flat and level, and pencil's going to be pointing right at the bottom. But if they're kind of off the envelope and they're hanging a little bit to the right, the pencil's going to hang a little right. If they're off the envelope to the left, pencil's going to hang a little bit to the left.
Really?
So you can kind of get a feel for where the receiver's at up front. The boom operator's telling you, and there's great communication. I will say that out of all of the career fields that I've gotten to work with in my time in the military, boom operators are some of the coolest, uh, most collected. I mean, they are just top of their game. I'm really, really impressed with that career field.
I would love to
Um,
talk to a boomer on this show.
yeah, yeah, I'll see if I can set you up with one. But
Sweet.
so we've got that as kind of a gauge as well, and then our trim wheel. Um, Someone once described it as a fishing reel, right? That if the trim is rolling forward, it's like they're reeling in the fish, so to speak, and if
Mm-hmm.
it's rolling back, they're reeling out the fish. So you can kind of get a feel for how close or how far back they are, just
Wow.
based off the flight control inputs up front, which is, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you feel it, you're like, oh yeah, this guy's not that good, or that gal's not this good, and you kind of get a feel
Ah.
for how they're doing.
Well, I feel also for those tankers that are training with the new B-52 pilots, learning how to fly the 52 and refuel from those. So that's got to be a handful. But we'll go back to that another time. But again, Nick, I so appreciate you being on my show. It's been good talk. I learned stuff. I love learning stuff. And that Navion, I mean, you're flying in 135, you got a Navion, you flew rotor. Very cool. I'm looking behind you. You got some cool stuff. Um, so don't hang up on me yet. We're gonna stop recording, but I just have a few things to tie up on my end. I want to send you some Flying Dutchman podcast, Hoagie Bait. And
Sure.
then we'll cut you loose and we'll conclude. There's my mouse. So, anyway, thank you everybody for joining myself and Nick on the Flying Dutchman podcast. We look forward to you for more episodes. Look for my YouTube channel where I do road trips and aviation oddities. And just be healthy, stay hydrated. And thank you again for joining us.